time to get in the huddle with your host, Charles Brodge Ritchie, here on the Masteel Podcast.
This thing belongs to Mr. Ronnie, belongs here, and let's see if we can bring this damn thing back here next year, along with the Super Bowl. Here we go.
The game is over. The Pittsburgh Steelers did it the hard way.
With the 10th pick in the 2018 NFL Draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers select Devin Bush, linebacker,
And good evening, everybody. Welcome to this edition here of the Masteel Podcast with me, Charles Brodge Ritchie. And we got a good one in store for you here today, right now, as we're getting ready to discuss the Pittsburgh Steelers offseason has already begun since they've been knocked out of the playoffs at the end of the 2019 season. The class of the 2020 Pro Football Hall of Fame was announced this past Saturday. And we do got three Steelers going to the Hall, which includes starting, of course, with Bill Cowher that was selected before the division round of the Ravens and Titans playoff game. Then later on that week, you also had the rest of the Centennial class, which included four-time Super Bowl champion, who also went undrafted, by the way. Talk about none other than Donnie Shell. And last but not least, Troy Polamalu was the last of the Steelers to get in. On his first try, he makes as a first ballot. This makes the Steelers 16 first ballot Hall of Famers total in their franchise history. Alan Falca will unfortunately have to wait now for one more season. He'll try to attempt on his sixth year in 2021. And join me on the line right now. It's a great honor and pleasure to introduce you right now. I'm talking about none other than Chris McSorley. He is a co-host on the Fan Morning Show on 93.7 The Fan. You could tune in every Monday through Friday. That's 5:40 a.m. Eastern Time to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. He is a co-host alongside Colin Dunlap. That is your home for Pittsburgh radio right there. They're in their 10-year anniversary, by the way. And Chris, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. It's been interesting and somewhat happy offseason, I guess, for Steelers fans to say the least so far. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charles. It's been interesting. That's one way to put it. I think anytime you go into an off season and look ahead to the subsequent season, wondering what the state of your quarterback position is going to be, it always throws kind of throws a big question mark over everything. And that's, I think, probably the first thing we'll all wait to see how Ben Roethlisberger's rehab progresses from the elbow surgery, and if he's in fact fully ready to go, whether it be minicamp in May, whether it be St. Vincent in the end of July, beginning of August. I know the Steelers would prefer the sooner the better. So we'll see.
Yeah, so with that being said, I mean, it's been noted for, like, offensive skill player. I mean, they had a few linemen before in the past decade, but they haven't had actually a position at, offense, really, the last being Rashard Mendenhall, which is a running back, by the way, back in 2008. So with that being said, do you think this is the year it finally happens where we'll finally see with their first, second round pick, which would be 49th overall, was confirmed by Dale Lally on the opening of the new year. Do you think we'll finally see an offensive skill player position selected, or depending what happens with Bud Dupree, if he decides to walk in free agency, declines to accept the Steelers tag, can you still possibly see him going outside linebacker? Your take?
I think it's going to, just with the depth of the draft where it is, Charles, which seems to be offensive skill positions, at least a wide receiver. I would not be the least bit surprised to see them go offense early. Yes, they've got weapons to an extent in Juju, James Washington, Deontay Johnson, but you can never have too many wide receivers, especially if there's talent that slides to that point, to that 49 spot in the draft. I saw a mock draft earlier, just the other day, that had one of the kids from LSU Jefferson sliding all the way to 49. So, if you get that kind of talent at that spot, you'd be crazy to pass it up. Now, I also think that they've got to focus at some point, whether it be in free agency, which they don't have a ton of cap room, or in the draft. They've got to figure out what they're going to do at the tight end position as a fail-safe sort of 1B option to Vance McDonald. Because as we saw in the Super Bowl, I think as we saw throughout the postseason, as we saw with just about every successful offense this year, you've got to have a tight end available, and especially when you're talking about an aging quarterback who isn't as mobile as he used to be, who's done some of his best work over his career with tight ends that he had a great chemistry with. Heath Miller at the top of that list, but certainly when Vance McDonald's been healthy, Ben's done well with him as well. You need to have that tight end, that check down option underneath, and I think that's something that may not fit in the second round, but it's certainly something they've got to keep an eye on this offseason. And with as deep as they are on defense, I think unless there's something major, i.e., a Dupree decides to hold out, which I get zero indication that that's going to be the case. I think, the defense, you can sort of wait for things to fall to you later in the draft. They've got one of the best defenses in the league right now. If they happen to try and pick up an inside linebacker / safety style hybrid who could take over for Mark Barron, that wouldn't be a problem. But yeah, the bulk of this year's 6 picks, I would think, come on offense, whether it be skill position or offensive line.
Yeah, you know what? And another thing I want to get your perspective on too, because I've been hearing like a lot of people in the media, because Ron Cook actually just said within the last few days going to this past weekend of the Super Bowl, he's actually texted with Ben Roethlisberger, and he's supposed to be seeing like a doctor in California sometime on the 21st, and he's hoping to be doing some light exercises, more particularly throwing tennis balls. I know a lot of people keep pointing to the fact that, well, Ben hasn't had this much of a good shutdown defense like he's had in a long time, probably since they last been in the Super Bowl, where they were number one in scoring defense. But with that being said, let's just say if he is healthy, can we trust the fact that when it's like game on the line, like situations where it's like in Denver in 2018 or in Jacksonville or previous years, do you think it's being overblown a little bit that if we have a healthy Ben, can we trust him to not make those same common mistakes where he'd be throwing in tight windows and turn over the ball, cost ball games? Because I got to be honest with you, that's still another half of this coin I think people forget right away. No matter how good the defense has been going and how fresh it's been without Antonio Brown, now Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson, especially when we have running back issues.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest key for the offense, in addition to the personnel issues we just talked about, Charles, is what's the personality of the offense? What's the identity of this offense? Because they didn't have one this year, the 2019 season. A lot of that was due to the fact that they were without Ben Roethlisberger. But to your point, I think it's a valid one to think about for people is, if Ben Roethlisberger, let's say he comes back and he's 110% healthy and looks, so let's say he even looks like the Ben Roethlisberger of, I don't know, let's go 2016, 2017. Right. That's good for the offense, obviously. But there is a concern about what the identity is going to be. Can you put the offense on a 38-year-old quarterback's shoulders? As we've seen, veteran quarterbacks can sometimes play well into their late 30s, early 40s, but it's not necessarily the level of quarterbacking that you need to carry an offense. I think of Peyton Manning, his final year in Denver in particular, as an example of that. So you do need to, if you've got a great defense, and the whole point is keeping the other team's offense off the field via your defense. Okay, what do you do now with the ball in your hands? How responsible are you with it?
Exactly.
What's the identity of their offense? Is it going to be putting Ben in better situations, safer situations, or are they going to say, hey Ben, you know what? Drop back 40 times and we still trust you to deliver the ball more often than not. I think the implementation of anything that Matt Canada may bring to the table will be one of the most interesting things to watch, both at minicamp and in the training camp.
Once again, we are talking with co-host Chris Mack of 93.7, the fan of the Family Morning Show. You can follow him at the Chris Mack on Twitter. And speaking of which, right now too, it was announced just only a few hours ago, earlier today. I want to say somewhere between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. How much better do you feel like about the Steelers situation now, knowing that Kevin Colbert has been extended? Because I got to be honest with you, that's another key element that's been going to this offseason. Because remember, his contract was originally supposed to expire after the 2020 draft. Now we get an extra year after next year's draft. How comfortable should Steelers fans feel, regardless of how Ben feels, knowing you got Colbert to stick around a little bit longer?
Well, I think anytime you have stability, it's a good thing. So, and certainly the Steelers have always thrived on stability. So, what'll be interesting now is that you'll have some things start to line up where you could have Kevin Colbert's, Mike Tomlin's, Ben Roethlisberger's, Marquise Pouncey's deals all expiring at the same time, and that's sort of that's the four horsemen of the apocalypse if they were all to get up and ride out together, right?
Right.
So I think Kevin's got the latitude that he can go year to year, and Art's going to let him do that. I think if he were to leave tomorrow, would they be in as good a place? Probably not. But do they have people in the building that they trust to take over that role, or multiple people to piece together into that role? Whether it's Omar Khan, who's sort of their capologist, whether it be Brandon Hunt, who's one of their directors of scouting. They have people in the building that they trust to take over that role from Kevin once he's done. But anytime you get upheaval in that position, and not even necessarily upheaval, just a change, just the slightest bit of change for a franchise and organization that desires stability as much as the Steelers do, it could create some issues. But I think, again, Kevin Colbert's been working with some of those guys so long that the transition, when he finally does decide to hang it up, should be somewhat seamless.
And same with Kevin Colbert and free agency right now. And we got right now for the Steelers, we got quite a decent amount of unrestricted free agents going to the new league year, which began on March 18th after 4 p.m. Eastern time this year for the 2020-2021 season. And the list of guys right here who we got, the most notable one obviously being Bud Dupree right now, who's actually going to be having calculated market value according to Spoke Track of 5 years at $83.03 million, about over $16.5 million per year. Then you also got on there, you got Javon Hargrave, who's going to be calculated about roughly close to 5 years, $74 million, about nearly $15 million per year. Then you also got your backup center, BJ Finney. Right cornerback, I think Ari Burns right now, probably safe to say he'll probably be cut more than anything. I'm not sure is he able to stick around. And then the last few guys you also got on here is tight end Nick Vannett and Cameron Kennedy, but more particularly between Dupree and Hargrave. Is it quite feasible? We could probably see another nose tackle drafted, but if you had to choose between those two, who's more impactful right now, obviously?
Well, I think, they're going to do everything they can to keep Bud Dupree in the fold. They obviously prefer a long-term deal because it, lowers the cap hit. But I also don't necessarily have a problem if you're the Steelers and you can finagle the cap, which they've got several veteran players that I can imagine wouldn't necessarily be excited about, but would be willing to restructure deals to create cap space. Bud Dupree could be tagged, and I don't think, again, I get zero indication that Bud Dupree has any problem with that. He'll take the, whatever it ends up being, probably around $15 million for a single year and playing another year under the tag. That being said, I think some of the other guys you mentioned, you probably don't want to plan on them being back next year. You talk about, obviously, Art, he's as good as gone. He's already packed up his stuff and left. You mentioned Javon Hargrave. I think, he's going to get priced out of Pittsburgh just because they don't have the money to spend on they've already got two big contracts on the defensive line in Hayward and Tuitt. They don't really have the ability to add a third big contract, and he's going to get it somewhere. And then when you go over to the offensive line, BJ Finney can get starters money somewhere. So there's no reason for him starters money and starters opportunity somewhere else. So there's no reason not to expect that he takes off. There's a chance we could be talking about Ramon Foster getting cut as well, being a cap casualty. Mark Barron's been talked about. I mentioned it before, but he could be a cap casualty. Again, trying to create space both for the Bud Dupree franchise tag or long-term extension and anything else they may want to do in free agency. So then you're talking about a restructuring of the offensive line. Matt Filer, I'm sure you've seen the talk about him moving over to left guard.
Right.
And then at right tackle, you could be talking about Chukwuemeka going up against Zach Banner, or I've seen the possibility floated of if there's an elite offensive tackle prospect available in the second or third round, you go after that, and then have those three battle it out for that spot, and eventually, one of those three, whoever's not at right tackle, moves over to left tackle the subsequent year when Al Villanueva's contract is up. So I think offensive line is one place, and admittedly so, I'm like this as well because of fantasy football and red zone and everything.
Right.
We get caught up in the skill position players and the offensive numbers. But this team, if they're going to remake their offense on the fly, and certainly that's what they're going to have to do as Ben Roethlisberger gets older, and all five of their starting offensive linemen were 30 or older, previous to Matt Filer taking over for Marcus Gilbert. They're going to have to remake that offensive line at the same time. So that's where I keep an eye on this offseason, is the beginning of that slow turnover along the offensive line.
And let's switch it up right now. And again, thank you very much for joining me here on this edition today of the podcast show. And real quickly, I know one of the biggest controversial things that we heard the day after the Super Bowl was coming from none other than Sports Illustrated's Peter King, who's on Football in America, I believe what's called, usually on NBC Sports Network, and part of Sports Illustrated for a long time. And he was explaining why he did not pick Polamalu. Not that I have a problem with it, but I think it came across as awkward when he's saying, I chose not to pick Polamalu because I wanted to make a strong case, knowing that he would get enough votes to get in for guys like a Steve Atwater, Edgerrin James, Tom Baselli, and a few other guys that he named. What was your stance on that? Because I know Derek Jeter was a topic of controversy a few weeks ago. I know it's Baseball Hall of Fame, and he didn't get unanimous. But your take on Peter King, and where you side with that, or how do you feel after hearing that explanation?
Well, I think Peter's phenomenal. I think he's great. I really respect his opinion, and he's got a ton of insight. But this is one place where I just thought it was just it was just completely backwards, the logic. I mean, if every Hall of Fame voter thought to themselves, hey, you know what, Troy Polamalu is a shoe-in first ballot Hall of Famer. I'm going to take the vote I was going to use on him because he's going to get in anyway, and I'm going to spend it on, one of those names you mentioned. And Troy Polamalu wouldn't get in, which would be ridiculous. So I think, when you're bestowed the honor, as it were, or the privilege of being able to vote on the Hall of Fame, I think you take it very seriously. And rather than looking at it as, well, can I make a statement with one of these votes? You vote who you think deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. So I thought it was really backwards from Peter, to be honest, and I don't agree with it at all. And I also know that there's the one that really, and again, the Hall of Fame is sort of this floating target now, especially with the introduction of the Centennial team and all the extra names that are going to flood the Hall of Fame this year. We could argue about the merits of a lot of them, probably Coach Cowher included, but I think the one that really bugged me was Alan Faneca, because it wasn't so much because I'm such a staunch Alan Faneca needs to be in the Hall of Fame supporter. It's more about, if Steve Hutchison's going to get in, then Alan Faneca should get in. And if your logic is Steve Hutchison belongs in the Hall of Fame, then Alan Faneca belongs in the Hall of Fame. Conversely, if your logic is Alan Faneca does not belong in the Hall of Fame, then Steve Hutchison doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. They are essentially the same player, except Alan Faneca has championships, or a championship ring. So, that to me was frustrating, and it very clearly, again, displays the sort of anti-Steelers bias that exists in Hall of Fame voting. They'd seen Donnie Shell and Bill Cowher get the Centennial team nods. Everybody knew you couldn't keep Troy Polamalu out on the first ballot, and so Alan Faneca has to take one. And it's frustrating to see that continue, because it shouldn't matter what logo was on the side of his helmet, what jersey you wore. It should matter the merits of the player. And if you believe the player deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, you vote him into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. And I think the reason that there was too many Steelers in the Hall of Fame, which was the obvious reason, which I myself included, felt around many, but I think it kind of goes out the window, especially when Alan Faneca played Steve Hutchinson one-on-one in Super Bowl 40. I mean, of course, they're playing different sides a lot. They're playing the same side of a lot of scrimmage, not the field at the same time, but Steelers did beat the Seahawks. He was partly hugely responsible for a huge 70-plus yard run by Willie Parker to help open up that game at that point. What I'm saying is, like, I mean, I know Ed Bouchette has expressed from many writers that it's like there's too many Steelers in the hall. Now they finally got 10 when it was last John Stallworth, but now they have these guys. It can be a little overwhelming, but I think it just gets watered down, especially when you put Hutchinson, who went on with him one-on-one. That part I just disagree with.
Yeah.
But anyway, real quickly, I just want to mention real quick. So Hall of Fame, Kevin Colbert, who has the most wins in Steelers history all time, 2 Super Bowl rings, 3 Super Bowl appearances. How do you feel about him, like, once it's all said and done? How soon does he get in? Does he get in right away, or does he have to wait? Given especially the era that he's in as a GM executive.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question. That, to be honest, I've never really thought of. You know, we've argued a lot about Mike Tomlin's credentials as a possible Hall of Fame coach someday, but a lot of people, and give you credit for thinking of it, I haven't really brought up the idea of Kevin Colbert going in as an executive. I think, you know, again, what do people think about somebody who's worked for the Steelers for so long? Well, they look at that as a positive or a negative when they're voting an executive into the Hall of Fame. So I think, you know, it's a great point you bring up, but I'll be very curious to see what people think of it. I would unfortunately doubt that it would happen right away, and that it might be a while before we would see something like that happen.
Yeah, and then also too, speaking of which, on here when we also look at this right now, according to Behind the Steel Curtain, let's just get back to the Steelers real quickly. They got them set as the over/under for wins this year is at 9.5. Where do you feel right now, even though it's still a little murky with Ben's elbow progress, depending on what they do in the offseason, free agency or trade or in the draft, where would you, if you were someone to ask you right now, over/under 9.5, where would you be at?
You know, I'd say that's probably right on the money given what we know so far.
Yeah.
You know, if Mason Rudolph's your starting quarterback, you're an 8 to 9 win team next year, I think, depending on what other adjustments may be made personnel-wise or offense, you know, scheme-wise by Matt Canada, if he has any input on that. And I think conversely, if Ben's back and you know, even remotely, looks even remotely like himself, I think they're probably a 10 to 11 win team, depending on how things shake out. So,
well, as long as he takes care of the football, like I mentioned, that's a big if right there. Because remember, they were also 9-6-1 when he was healthy, and you still have somewhat of a decent, respectable offense. Miles Bell being the big pitcher, you still had Antonio Brown. It's a very valid point you bring up, and I think is a part of the whole ball of wax when you roll it all up and talk about the quarterback position. Yeah, like they always say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So we'll find out with him this season if he's clear and if he is back to where he is. And before I let you out, Chris, just thank you once again for joining. But want to just congratulate you and the crew and everybody. I know this February 15th it will mark the 10-year anniversary of 93.7 Fan. I know you guys just rating up. You and the Pittsburgh Mark have been working extremely hard, your butts off, to get it to a sports talk radio station. And if you don't mind just sharing a little bit more light on this, February 14th from, I believe you said 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern time, you're going to be having a commercial-free on Valentine's Day. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what people can expect on those shows that day? Yeah, I think it's just an opportunity to celebrate what the station's all about for Pittsburgh sports fans, and more time to do so, you know. It's going to be big that, you know, commercial free that day, because we get to, you know, we'll get to spend more time with our guests. We'll get to, you know, spend some time playing some special look backs at, you know, other audio and old stuff. You know, we were just kicking around some ideas today. You know, Jim Colley, who's our update guy on the morning show, had a great interview he did with, you know, the Young Money crew when it was Emmanuel Sanders and Mike Wallace and Antonio Brown, when all three of them were young. So I gotta tell you, you're in my top 3 shows, man. I gotta tell you, with you, the Bob Pompiani show, and the Cook and Joe show. Seriously, I'm like listening to you like religiously almost every morning going to work, or on Saturday, Pompiani, and then like somehow listen to the podcast later on, even though I'm usually at work. But You guys do a
We
phenomenal
appreciate it,
job.
Charles. I mean, that's huge, especially you out of town.
I also love your epic
Yeah.
ending too, by the way. I must say that before we get out here. That is some awesome
Yeah.
stuff right there.
So I mean that's big, that we have that kind of reach that way to people outside of Pittsburgh sports fans who are all over the world. So that means a lot. Thank you.
Well, hey, once again, I just want to just say thank you very much. I just want to say, as my previous guests I had on before, you were just as enjoyable. Made this conversation a whole lot smooth, a lot of fun. Thank you very much. I just want to wish you and everyone the continued success on 93.7 The Fan. And also, too, one last thing I have to say, but I got to give you guys my deepest prayers, love, and sympathy for the Pittsburgh Pirates. So I know what's been happening, all the success with the Penguins right now and the Steelers. Here we go again. Will they not miss the playoffs 3 straight years under Tomlin? But I know Pirates baseball seems to bar people a little bit more up. And I hope that situation gets better real soon and fast from what they're projecting.
We need all the sympathy we can get, so we appreciate it, Charles. And thanks again for listening. It really does mean a lot.
Well, like they say in Pittsburgh, you've been knowing this for over 4 decades. We are family, and definitely part of our family here. Chris, you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Be safe in this winter, and hopefully we can do this again down the road. Thanks a lot, my man.
Sounds great, Charles. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, Chris. Bye-bye.
Yep, you too.
And once again, that was Chris Mack of 93.7 The Fan. Chris Mack Sorley. He can be followed at the Chris Mack. You catch their show every Monday through Friday. That's from 5:40 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on 93.7 The Fan. If you guys live in Pittsburgh, that's the station to hit up, as you're aware. But for people who want to stream the show, you can also download the radio.com app and search 93.7 The Fan. Their sports radio, 93.7 The Fan. That's their format right there. Definitely one of my funnest guests of them all. And I got to say right now, like I said, that's a big reminder. I mean, a lot of people are always saying, well, Ben comes back healthy. I know a lot of people are treating this elbow injury like it's Tommy John surgery. But you got to remember something here. Like I said, if Ben is healthy once again when he comes back to the Steelers lineup, my only thing I had to say for that, can we trust Ben Roethlisberger to not make the same mistakes throwing the ball? Remember, he has been a turnover-prone quarterback the last few years. I mean, even more so, I mean, you could even, point to when the Steelers collapsed, I believe it was at 7-2-1 or 7-3-1, wherever it was, but you're able to squeak out only 2 more wins. Plus, that tie was crucial. So I'll believe it when I see it with Ben Roethlisberger. Definitely want to have him back, but you also got to remember, too, he also struggled his ass off with these young receivers and the young talent that he had. Let's not ignore that and turn a blind eye on that. I think that's so much more to keep an eye on. But other than that, Chris, I just want to say, I know you're probably still listening or tuning in, but if you're going home or whatever, thank you once again, my man. That was the funnest interview I ever did with anybody. And let's go ahead up fair or foul. We just heard from Chris Mack. He says it's right on the money. Fair or foul, say you right now. According to Jeff Hartman, up behind the steel curtain, he can be followed on Twitter at BNG Blitz. What do you guys think? 9.5 wins over under set for the Steelers? I'm going to say fair on that one. And I still think they can even hit 10 wins. Let's just say if Ben Roethlisberger is not able to go. I mean, Mason Rudolph, you got to believe right now that benching that he had a couple of weeks until he got hurt once again against the Jets game back in Week 16. And that, more importantly, started with Marquise Pouncey going out. And, of course, B.J. Finney rarely ever makes mistakes at the offensive line, but you saw how valuable his presence was missed in that. So, look, you got to remember, everybody is culpable and accountable on this team. So let's just see how that goes. So I'm going to go ahead and say fair on that one. I still believe it could be 10 wins, but you also have to have people step up. You also can't be challenging good top corners and defensive backs in the league like they did in Buffalo Week 15. So it's still a ways to go, but I'm going to go ahead and trust that they get 10 wins this year, despite regardless of what happens with Ben Roethlisberger. I got enough confidence in them, the defense. But let's remember, too, this defense, as good as they're doing, I do believe a lot of that was attributed to playing desperation defense with Ben Roethlisberger being out. And then fair and final topic number 2 right now, and the last one as we get into this, as we already know that Kevin Colbert has got a 1-year extension, so you can breathe easy, Steeler Nation. He'll be extended through the 2021 draft. After the 2021 draft, his contract will expire, so we got him for at least another season. Fair or foul that he gets in as a first ballot Hall of Famer when his career is all said and done. I will say fair on that one as well. He's the fastest GM to 200 wins all time in NFL executive history when you look at it. And for him being the vice president and GM, when we analyze and break down everything, a guy like with Kevin Colbert who's dedicated himself to the craft of his team. He's got 205 wins, 113 losses, and 2 ties. And that's 25 more wins than the legendary Dick Haley, who was a GM of that 70s Steel Curtain that won 4 Super Bowls. So for him doing it in the era that he's doing in right now, especially when you got teams being hit with more flags, more penalties, and playing in a safer league, I think that is huge. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Men of Steel podcast. I just want to say once again, thank you very much for those of you tuning in. You can follow me on social media. Remember, at Pride Richie, at Men of Steel CGR for the Men of Steel podcast show. And then, of course, Instagram, Men of Steel Nation, and my YouTube channel, Men of Steel podcast. And then feel free to hit the like button when you search for the Men of Steel Facebook page. Once you hit the like button, you can just next time simply search at Men of Steel Nation. That's capital M, capital S, capital N. For Charles and the Men of Steel podcast, I'm signing off. Don't be trolling, be rolling. I gone.